December is when most people assume that mushroom season is over, but there is still plenty to be found. Once the leaves have fallen and the cold settles in, a different class of species emerges in the woodlands. Winter fungi are specialists. They are adapted to low light, freezing temperatures, and slow decomposition. Many fruit slowly over long periods, sitting tight through frosts, and thawing back out on milder days. You'll often find them in the most consistently damp microhabitats: deep moss, saturated leaf litter, decaying branches, or the nutrient-rich mulch beneath trees. Even now, in the quiet beginnings of winter, the fungi are still working hard beneath our feet. They're processing the last of the autumn leaves, releasing minerals and nutrients that will fuel the first wild greens in spring. What I love most about December foraging is the clarity of the landscape. With that undergrowth gone, you can suddenly read the forest floor. You notice contours of old roots, the soft map of mycelial threads beneath the leaves, the textures of rotting wood and mossy banks. It's also a brilliant time for beginners. Fewer species means fewer lookalikes, and a calmer woodland to observe. Horn of Plenty is one of those mushrooms that most people walk straight past because they blend in so well to the forest floor. From a distance, they almost look like shadows or hollows in the leaf litter rather than a patch of mushrooms. But look closely and you might notice black trumpet-shaped curls rising from the forest floor. Once you finally spot one, stand completely still, because it's likely that you have dozens more at your feet. Its scientific name is Chanterelles cornucopioides, which might sound tricky to remember at first, but once you start to understand the meaning behind the Latin, mushroom names start to make a lot more sense. Chanterelles means little crater or small bowl. Cornucopioids, when broken down, becomes cornu, meaning horn, and copia, meaning plenty, and oides, which means likeness of form. So this name is saying that the mushroom looks like the horn of plenty, the mythical symbol of abundance. Horn of Plenty is considered a choice edible, a gourmet mushroom if you will. When it's dried, the flavour becomes incredibly rich, almost smoky and truffle-like. A small handful goes a really long way. If you're looking to seek out this mushroom, check the places where soil is well drained but rich, with decades of leaf mulch. They do particularly well on calcareous soils, so chalky or limestone-rich ground, but they're also really happy on neutral woodland soils, as long as there's a deep layer of leaf litter to hold their moisture. Mossy hollows, gentle downslopes, and the places where leaves naturally gather tend to be their favourite spots. It has a particular fondness for broadleaf woodland, especially places dominated by beech and oak. These older woodlands, with their deep leaf litter and steady shade, create the cool, moist microclimates this species loves. When it comes to identification, Horn of Plenty is actually one of the more distinctive wild mushrooms. These are essentially black funnels, completely hollow from the very top of the cap all the way down through the stem. The cap and the stem are actually one continuous tube, so there's no separation in the way you'd see in a lot of gilled mushrooms. The colour of these mushrooms can change as they dry or age. Typically, inside the funnel, the surface ranges from a charcoal grey to a deep sooty black. The outside, which is the spore-bearing surface, is actually a softer, smoky grey, sometimes almost blue-grey, with faint wrinkles instead of gills. When Horn of Plenty first emerges, it pushes through the leaf litter as tiny, tightly curled cones. Young horns are surprisingly firm, with thicker, more leathery walls that feel almost suede-like to the touch. The inside of the mushroom is a deep charcoal black, while the outside is a lighter slate grey, sometimes even taking on a dark blue-grey tint depending on the light. But as they age, the cap edges begin to fray and split a little bit like torn flower petals. Their size can vary quite dramatically, even within the same patch. Some only reach a couple of centimetres tall, while others stretch up to 8 or sometimes even 10 centimetres, and the larger ones can flare out into wide, elegant trumpets. These mushrooms have quite a distinctive aroma, not too dissimilar to their cousins, the chanterelles, which are known for having a very fruity, almost apricot-like scent to them. As the mushrooms age, that scent shifts to a more typical mushroomy aroma. The spores are a pale cream colour, and you can often see that as a fine dusting on the outside surface of these mushrooms. Horn of Plenty is very much a late season mushroom. starting to appear in mid to late autumn and carry on right through winter, often lingering well into December. Horn of Plenty is one of the safest mushrooms that you can forage for. There are no toxic lookalikes. There is a mushroom that you could get this confused with, the ashen chanterelle, which is in the same family as the Horn of Plenty, but this is also edible, although a lot less common. The main difference lies beneath the cap. Ashen chanterelles have false gills similar to the golden chanterelles, whereas the Horn of Plenty has no noticeable gills at all. The French call this mushroom trompette de la mort, which means trumpet of the dead. And many people think this is because they grow from decomposing bodies or old burial grounds, but these aren't mushrooms that grow from the dead. Instead, the Horn of Plenty chooses a symbiotic life with the roots of trees. Ecologically, they play the same role as other members of the Chanterelles and Chanterelle family. The ectomycorrhizal, forming a living partnership with trees. Their underground mycelium fuses with the tree's roots and helps store up water, phosphorus and trace minerals that the tree would struggle to reach on its own. In return, the tree feeds the fungus sugars, produced through photosynthesis. Because of that relationship, Horn of Plenty helps stabilise and nourish the forest ecosystem, especially in older woodlands, where those underground networks have been developing for decades. When harvesting, I tend to pull them up quite gently from the ground and trim them at the base. Cutting off that little muddy end keeps the rest of your basket clean, and it stops any soil from getting into the gills of any other mushrooms that you've collected that day. They're not a particularly messy mushroom, but a quick trim when you're out in the woods makes it a lot easier to prep once you get back to the kitchen. My favourite way to store these mushrooms is simply just to dehydrate them. Their thin funneled shape makes them dry really beautifully, and the flavour becomes really intense. Once you're ready to use them again, you can rehydrate them in a little bit of hot water or stock, or grind the mushrooms into a powder and use it as an umami seasoning. A word of warning when cooking these is be careful what else you put in the pan, because the colour will leach into anything that it cooks with, and it doesn't make a particularly appetising grey colour. This is because the Horn of Plenty contains an unusually dark natural pigment, one of the deepest blacks found in any edible mushroom. This pigment is thought to help protect the fruit and bodies from UV and moisture loss out in the woodlands. The Horn of Plenty grow in big clusters or groups, but what looks like dozens of individual mushrooms is often just one single underground organism fruiting in many places at once. Horn of Plenty can produce huge patches of trumpets that all belong to the same mycorrhizal network, sometimes stretching across several metres. As their name suggests, these mushrooms are plentiful where they are to be found, and they very rarely grow solitary, so if you do spot one, take a really good look at all of the surrounding area and you'll be sure to find lots more. Our next mushroom is in the same family as the Horn of Plenty, the trumpet or winter chanterelle. These are a great mushroom for beginners because not only are they fairly common, but they're super easy to identify and have no toxic lookalikes. They tend to start appearing in late autumn, but they don't usually hit their stride until the colder months. Their season often runs right through December and even January in milder years if we don't have a hard frost. Winter chanterelles can be incredibly difficult to spot, seeming to camouflage almost perfectly with the fallen birch and beech leaves. The winter chanterelle sits in the same family as the Horn of Plenty, the Chanterelles genus. They're part of the order Chanterelles, the same wider group that includes golden chanterelles and hedgehog mushrooms. The Latin name is Chanterelles tubiformis. Tubiformis meaning shaped like a tube, and as we learnt earlier, Chanterelles means little crater. When these mushrooms are small, they're very compact with a rounded closed over cap. You often notice a yellow stem pushing up from the moss or leaf litter before the cap is even opened. The caps are a soft grey-brown or olive-brown colour, sometimes with a slight sheen when the weather is damp. As they mature, the caps open out into frilly funnels with a hole in the centre that runs all the way down through that yellow stem. The colour beneath the cap can change depending on its age or size or where it grows, but it's usually somewhere between a yellow, grey or light brown colour. The gills are decurrent, which means they run down into the stem, but they're not actually true gills at all. They're what we call false gills. They look a little bit like wrinkles or folds of fabric rather than the blades that you'd see on true gilled mushrooms. Winter chanterelles have transverse gills, which are these smaller secondary gill-like structures that you can see connecting the main radiating gills. This creates a web-like structure that increases the spore-bearing surface. The stems are a bright yellow colour, and often split lengthways to form what looks like two little legs, which is how they also get their other name of yellow legs. The stem is completely hollow, and if you tear one apart, you'll see a tube running straight through from the top to the bottom. You might think that these bright yellow legs would make them easy to spot, but their unremarkable brown cap colour really does make them quite difficult to spot amongst the leaves on the forest floor. Even if you're quite experienced with foraging these and know exactly where to go to, it does still take a couple of minutes to really get your eye in and spot that first one. These mushrooms are thin and flexible, but quite flimsy with a rubbery feel to the touch. Older ones can dry out and become brittle around the edges. You'll almost always find them in a good condition if they're young and fresh, because insects don't really seem to bother with them too much. They have a gentle earthy smell, slightly fruity too, much like the rest of the chanterelle family, but not quite as strong as golden chanterelles or the horn of plenty. Winter chanterelles are not very big mushrooms. Most stand at around 4 to 8 centimetres tall, sometimes a little taller, and the caps can usually measure between 2 and 5 centimetres across, often about the size of a 50p piece. They grow in groups or large clusters, so if you find one, always pause and look around. While winter chanterelles don't have any toxic lookalikes, they can resemble the sinuous chanterelle, another edible member of the Chanterelles genus. These are a bit flimsier and less common than the winter chanterelle, but where they do appear, you can find them in huge numbers tucked beneath the leaf litter. And again, the key thing to look for is the structure beneath the cap. Sinuous chanterelles have smooth folds, much more like the horn of plenty, rather than the false scales that you see on the winter chanterelles. Winter chanterelles are deeply tied to woodland that holds steady moisture. They turn up most reliably in conifer woods, spruce and pine especially, but they're just as happy in a mixed forest where birch and beech mingle with the evergreens. What they're really looking for is that cool, damp microhabitat, the mossy edges of drainage lines, shallow dips where needles and leaves naturally collect, and the shaded banks where the ground never really dries out. The forest floor in these places often feels soft and springy with a thick layer of moss and decomposing needles. And I also often find these mushrooms right beside well-used paths. Winter chanterelles are an excellent edible mushroom, and they're one of the easier ones to clean and process. Because they grow right up out of moss and needle beds rather than the soil, they tend to stay much cleaner than some of the other wild fungi. When I'm harvesting them, I either pull them up gently from the ground or snip them off at the base with a mushroom knife or a pair of scissors. Either way, I trim off the very bottom of the stem while I'm still in the woods. When you get them home, they don't need much fuss at all. A quick brush or a gentle shake is usually enough to remove anything caught in the false scales. They very rarely need washing. Because these are small and delicate mushrooms, winter chanterelles tend to cook quite fast, so they're brilliant for pan frying. They also brown quite nicely and hold their shape well. Their flavour is mild and earthy and slightly fruity, and they go great with anything in a cream or a white wine sauce. My go-to preservation methods for these mushrooms are drying or pickling. They dehydrate really well. The thin funnel shape dries evenly and fast, and the flavour becomes a lot more concentrated. You can store them whole or crumble them up into flakes or a powder. They also keep their shape and texture really well when pickled in vinegar. Winter chanterelles are part of a wider guild of fungi that help keep the woodland functioning through the colder months. There's evidence that members of the Chanterelles group act as nurse fungi, linking into the roots of young conifers and saplings to help them access micronutrients and moisture in the early years. By stabling the soil and sharing resources through the underground network, they can improve the survival of young trees and help shape how the next generation of forest establishes itself. Wood blewits are probably some of the most colourful mushrooms you can find out in the woods and forests in winter. They appear late in the season, often after many of our favourite edible mushrooms like the blewits have finished fruiting for the year. They paint deep leaf litter, mulch piles, and even garden beds and old compost heaps in beautiful shades of lilacs and violet. They're fairly easy to recognise once you get to know them, but unlike the other two mushrooms we've spoken about today, wood blewits do have a few dangerous lookalikes. Wood blewits are a very good edible mushroom, but only when they're cooked properly. When they're raw or undercooked, they contain irritant toxins that can cause nausea, cramps or vomiting. Fortunately, these are thermolabile toxins, which means they're destroyed by heat. Once a mushroom is cooked all the way through, these compounds break down and the blewit becomes safe to eat. Even so, a small number of people are intolerant to wood blewits. Some people's digestive systems just don't handle certain fungal proteins very well, in the same way that some people react to chicken of the woods or honey fungus. So if it's your first time trying wood blewits, just test out a small portion on their own. Wood blewits are extremely common and usually appear in little groups or clusters. When they're young, the caps are domed, round and very smooth, usually a deep frosted lilac colour. As they mature, they flatten out into broad, chunky caps. Most are about 5 to 15 centimetres across. The richer soils can produce even bigger mushrooms. The margins can become just a little wavy or irregular with age, and you'll often see an umbo or small bump in the middle of the cap. The caps are hygrophonous, which just means their colour shifts depending on moisture. After rain, they can look dramatically darker, then fade back into lilac buff tones as they dry. They always hold onto a hint of that purple, somewhere around the rim or gills, even in quite old specimens. Wood blewit gills are crowded and start off a bright lilac or pinkish lilac, gradually becoming more flesh coloured as the spores develop, but they never ever turn a rusty brown. The gills are what we call adnate, or very slightly sinuate, meaning that they meet the stem and may have a small notch. These features separate them from a lot of the funnel caps and from many of the dangerous Cortinarius species. The stem is usually the same lilac tone as the cap, often a little paler towards the base, and quite tough and fibrous. Blewits don't taper, they tend to have a bulbous foot, and when you pick them, you often see fluffy purple mycelium clinging to the base. That's a really nice supporting feature, especially in rich leaf litter where the mycelium spreads really strongly. Inside the mushroom, the flesh is pale and firm when they're fresh, and the smell is a really good standout clue. Wood blewits have a strong, perfumed floral scent that some people describe as fruity soap or frozen orange juice, but whether or not you get those exact notes, the smell is unmistakably fragrant, and absolutely nothing like the earthy or musty smell of the web caps. The spore print is pale pink to flesh coloured, and this is the most important safety check, because the dangerous purple web caps have rusty brown spores. Web caps lack that perfumed scent of the wood blewits and may also still show wispy cortina threads across the gills. If you're ever unsure, then a spore print is a really good way to confirm your findings. Field blewits and sordid blewits can look quite similar to the wood blewits. These are both in the same genus and are both edible as well. The clouded agaric is also sometimes mistaken for a wood blewit, but it has a grey coloured cap, a mealy smell and a white spore print. Always look out for the combination of lilac purple tones, that pink spore print, that floral scent, the crowded lilac gills, the chunky fibrous stem, and absolutely no rust colour on the stem or the gills. The Latin name for wood blewits has changed a lot over the years, but it's most widely known as Lepista nuda. A recent taxonomic revision has proposed moving it to the genus Colibia, so in the next 5 to 10 years you may see it listed more often as Colibia nuda. You'll also often see the name Clitocybe nuda being used in older field guides. These names actually tell us a bit about how people have interpreted this mushroom over the years. Lepista means little goblet or small cup, which fits that broad, open shape that mature blewits can develop. Nuda means naked, referring to the very smooth and plain surface of the cap and the stem. Clitocybe means sloping head, a reference to that funnel shape, and Colibia means little coin or small round cake, which kind of matches that neat, domed, rounded lilac cap that you see when they're young. Unlike winter chanterelles or the horn of plenty, which are mycorrhizal mushrooms, wood blewits are saprotrophic. They break down dead and decaying organic matter, rather than forming tree partnerships. This means that you can find them whenever there is deep leaf litter or old mulch, and they even often pop up in old compost heaps and garden beds. Blewits rarely fruit alone, so look for clusters, sometimes in arcs or rings, where the mycelium has expanded outwards over several years. As recyclers, they help to convert carbon-rich material into healthy humus, improving soil structure and moisture retention. In gardens and allotments, a blewit patch usually indicates well-developed fungal-rich soil. If you're harvesting wood blewits from the wild and you're not intending to grow your own patch with them, then it's best practice to cut them off at the base of the stem or just pull them up very gently from the leaf litter. As saprobic mushrooms, that leaf litter is their food source, so if we take that away, then we are reducing the chances of the mycelium being able to come back strong enough next year. Once you've finished prepping the mushrooms for your dinner, you can save the stem butts and pop them in your compost bin. For a more reliable method, you could wrap them up in a piece of damp cardboard before tucking them into your compost heap or vegetable bed, and that way you could have an endless supply of homegrown wood blewits.